Hi, this is Zach Katkin with Olympia Marketing. Um, Today we're going to be talking about local SEO. So it's a topic that's been coming up a lot with my clients, potential clients. The question of, you know, uh, basically, how do I get business as a small local business or smaller local business? Maybe you're doing $500,000 a year in business, whatever you do, whether it's a small local grocer, restaurant. Um, you do some industrial work, construction, whatever it is that your company does, right? The question is, okay, how can you grow? How can you get more business? How do you get more notoriety, more um, customers aware that you are around, that you're in town, that you're a good resource, right, for whatever their needs are. And so what happens is, and let's do this together. If you go to Google and let's search for um, anything here. I've got a card on my desk for a custom closet company. So let's look for that. Let's look at custom closet company. And so what we see in the search results, Google getting more than 90% of all searches. We've already made a leap here in terms of connecting some dots, right? Things you don't think about when you're doing what you do every day and when others are doing what they do every day. The first step is someone has a need, someone's looking for something, right? How do they do it? Years past, they used to look at the yellow pages, talk to friends, family. They still do that to some extent, but overwhelmingly, they're turning to Google specifically. Now, the stats are pretty insane in terms of Google versus some of the other search engines like Bing, which is number two, which I think is still called Bing. I mean, I personally don't use Bing much. So, yeah. So, so what they do is they turn to search engines. They go to a website, they open up their browser on their phones, and they search. And so, that's the number one step. Overwhelmingly, that's done on Google. And just break this down. People are using this tool to find the company that they want to do business with, right? Or do research on a company they already know about. And so we've done that search, custom closet company, right? And now what do we see? First, we see up here, I'm based in Estero, Florida. So Google is aware, hey, we've got some location data on you, and it's going to feed you the information it thinks makes sense for you, right? And so now we scroll down a little bit and we have here sponsored, 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 sponsored. We have 4 advertisements. And these are companies that have said, hey, we are in, and this is if they've done it right, because that's a whole nother conversation, probably multi-hour video I could do on the way Google advertising works. But long story short, they've said to Google, if somebody searches for closets, custom closets, that's what we do. We're in this relative area. Show our ad. We want to get in front of that person. We're willing to pay for it, right? So you can see here Naples, which is just south of Estero, California Closets, which looks like a national brand of some kind. Maybe they've got a local franchise. Closets by Design, and then Inspired Closets, which also looks to be, actually, I don't know where that's located. But so all of these are advertisers that have just forced their way onto Google. Now, especially on mobile, I'm on a desktop here to make the video easier, that way you can see things. Especially on mobile, you're not going to see as many advertisements generally. Here you see a lot. I mean, quite literally, it's the entire first 2-3 scrolls. So you're going to jump more quickly to this area. And this is the area that we see most of our activity and engagement on when it comes to kind of quote unquote local SEO as a product, as something that we help our clients optimize their business, their website for, so they can get on here, so they can get more business. And so if we scroll down, generally, especially on mobile, especially on things that maybe aren't as hot, like I'd imagine a lot of these closets are quite expensive, anywhere from like $5,000 to $10,000 and up. So if you get a customer on here, it's very good. So these businesses are paying a lot of money to be here. But generally, you're going to see, this is a pretty competitive market, but generally you're going to just jump straight to this, right? And what is this? This is what I call and others call the Google Map Pack. and it's a breakdown of your relative location. So you can see here we're in Southwest Florida, and you see my computer address right now is out here on the east. And when I do a search, what comes up, right? Okay, 3 businesses that Google has said, as far as companies that we know that do something close to, custom closets, these are the best in the area for your geographic, right? And the geographic is basically set based on, as we saw before, your location, plus by zooming out on this map. And you can kind of see this relative square, what would it be? Probably 40 miles every direction, probably more like 300 square miles total. And you see too that the location is varied as far as the actual things it's showing. And that really, you really get into the weeds. I've had some accounts where we're looking at literally every half square mile. Where are we? And there's some tools out there, which we're going to get to, that I'll show you here in a second, that are really helpful with that. Tools that we use. I'm not going to go through the tool so much as just show you some of the data that it offers. So what you can see here is PLC Closets. It's listed as number 1. It's based in Bonita Springs. And then we have Inspired Closets and Naples Closets. And what's interesting here is, part of what I can tell based on this search right now is PLC is number 1 for me personally, because it is the shortest distance, right? Geographically speaking. Now, it's actually longer than some of these longer distances because of the way the roads work down here. But as far as just straight geographical, if I could fly a plane straight to that address, that would be the closest place. And so you can see it doesn't line up with the reviews that are happening. So what Google My Business is, it's another product by Google, and it's one of the ways that this all gets kind of layered into one another and presented to you, is these businesses have set up a Google My Business page, which we'll get to here in a second. And then their customers come along, add reviews, add pictures. The company itself adds updates, all kinds of things. And it's very, very valuable, very helpful. It's actually one of the number 1, if not the number 1 thing I recommend to any business. Doesn't matter who you are, get yours set up, get it optimized, get pictures on there, get all your details in there. It's the single most helpful thing you can do. In fact, it's probably right now more valuable than a website, at least to start. If a business owner came to me and said, "Hey, I'm thinking about starting my own website on Squarespace versus starting my own Google My Business," I would say do your Google My Business first. Don't worry about setting up your own website. A lot of the setup of a website is very technical. It's detail oriented. There's a lot of steps to it. So if you can do 1/100th of the work and get the same value, at least initially, do that. And then a website comes later as you're being spotted, seen, as you're growing your ranking of this and your reviews and whatnot through time. So, and we're going to come back to this as well, right? But just as an FYI, this is the map pack. This is the single most important place to be right now, in my opinion, on Google for a local business. Nothing more important. And the question is, how do you get there? And then if we scroll down, we have what are called, kind of just colloquially, the organic search results. And I also like to say that these are local because they are locally oriented, right? And there's a number of factors that go into this. It gets rather technical, and I'll probably, skip over a lot of that because of the audience. If anybody watches this and is interested, we can go into more details. But long story short, Google's doing the same thing with websites. So up here, it's saying, okay, of the businesses that have created a profile with us as a Google My Business, they've verified their business, they've verified their business address. They've put all kinds of data as far as what the business does. The same thing is happening here, but just for websites specifically. So, and it gets a little bit convoluted or mixed up because some of this is what I call national SEO and some is local. And, no matter what Google's trying to do again is say, okay, based on the address that we have for this person in Estero somewhere, we think that these are the websites that are most relevant based on what this person is searching for, right? And there's hundreds of different factors that go into ranking this over this or this over this, and then matching that to me personally based on my browser. All kinds of stuff is going on behind the scenes. But you can see here that we had, let's see, this is a good example. California Closets was a sponsored, so they paid for an ad. They're not in the map pack, but here they are, number 3 in the search results. So they could benefit, as an example, if they have a local location, of doing some optimizations to try to get higher in this list. I'm unique in that I'm so far away, and this, if I was closer to this area, I probably would see, I would see a different list, but I would probably see them in some sort of, top 3, let's say. But so it gets rather tricky, and we track this initially and then over time and all kinds of things. So, but again, down here, these are websites that Google has basically combined a couple different things. It's looked out, it's scoured the web, it knows and indexed a bunch of websites and said, okay, Zach, your search is being done on a computer. Everything we know about you, marry that with everything we know about individual websites as it pertains to the search query that you just did. And so one example of this where I like to say, it's not as clear cut as local versus national SEO is Houzz. Houzz is a great example. Houzz is primarily a lead gen site similar to something like Yelp, but oriented towards the construction and home services industry, right? And so if we go to this website, we're going to see their list of professional custom closet designers in Fort Myers. And now Fort Myers is essentially the best Google could do in figuring out, okay, of all the websites that are out there, what's the most appropriate thing to bring back? And then this is just a listing, right? A listing of the closet companies. And a lot of them are going to be similar to what we saw on the other pages. And so there we have PLC, Prime Design Interiors, and they have a bunch of reviews. And this is more oriented towards the end user in terms of, okay, PLC Closets is a custom closet designer. They're based in, let's see if we can get their actual address. They're based in Naples. And they've actually done the work that that I'm looking, to get done based on my search. Here's some of that actual work. Oh, they do some pretty amazing work. That's a nice custom closet. And there you go. So 25 to 50,000, and I know in the trades industries, because of the product margins, they're probably making, I would say, $5 to $10 to $15,000 on a job like this. So if you can get, $15,000 or more profit on a job, are you willing to say, hey, just put our ad up and be number 1? And there are also ads that appear in this area too on occasion. Doesn't look like anybody's doing that, or it's not shown for the search that I did. So absolutely. I mean, you would probably pay, I would say, for a job like that, upwards of a few $1,000s. So probably a couple $100 per lead on something like that. But so this is more oriented to the end user, and it's kind of a triage game that these services have played, which is, okay, you local small business, you don't care about marketing, you don't, and I've dealt with this a lot. I've been doing this over 20 years. Many small businesses, and I try the best I can to convince people the opposite of what I'm about to say, but many small businesses are just like, I don't know anything, I don't want to spend any money, so I'll just sign up for a service like Houzz, and they'll take a commission, or I'll pay for each of the leads that I get, right? Instead, what I like to do, what I encourage my customers and my clients to do, is own the market, right? Do your own marketing. It's not that difficult. You can definitely compete. In fact, in many ways, you can outcompete. A good example is this specific listing. So Houzz does not have a local office, so they will never be able to rank here, right? And I have often seen with the right optimizations, my clients are able to outrank national aggregator sites like Houzz by doing some things on their own website. And the value is tremendous. I mean, one example here is, these listings down here, kind of the organic search results. The difference between number 1 and number 2 is about 50%. So you will get twice as many clicks and leads if you're just one placement higher. And you think about that over the course of time, over the course of a year, 2, 5 years, etc. And we're looking at, potentially hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars worth of value, leads, etc. Or you can let Houzz run and rule, and then they'll sell all the leads and make their millions of dollars. So it's just basically a trade-off. Do you want to spend the money, own the market, be more in control of your own destiny, or, and maybe you're a new business, you can't afford to do that. So maybe you just decide, no, I'm just going to pay for the lead and that's it. I will say there's one sort of exception to this that I've seen, and it is because of the massive amount of traction, the network effects, the money that gets spent, and that is real estate. And actually, I do not work in real estate anymore, despite it being the single most, I would say, the single biggest niche that I've had experience in over the last 20 plus years. And that's because of a couple different things. One of which is the market, and number 2 is I think over the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to see a major retooling of the whole real estate market, where there will no longer be local agents and local brokers. And as much as I've known a number of local agents and brokers, and I know all the arguments as far as why they're valuable and helpful, etc. What I've seen behind the scenes is very different from that. I don't agree with the way the real estate is run in the U.S. as far as transactionally with real estate agents and brokers. It's an absolute huge money siphon away from small homeowners primarily towards big companies. And one of the biggest groups that have kind of come in and started to dominate are companies like Zillow and Realtor.com and others. And they just outspend and they control all the data. They've worked with the MLSs to get all the data. And now, in some cases, they are the MLS. So there's just no, you're not really going to compete with them. You could, I'd say as recently as 3 to 5 years ago, and certainly over the last 20. But very few brokers were willing to kind of understand things technically, put up the capital to own the market and understand why it's so valuable and helpful. And so, so very, very, very few, if any, that I've ever seen, I know locally, at least in Southwest Florida, none have done that. But there's just so much fraud and misrepresentation and really a lack of value in the real estate space that I think if your average local broker and real estate agent disappear, I think would be a good thing for the market in general. They're not providing any value in terms of search. They're not providing any value in terms of sales acumen. The only thing of value I've ever seen a real estate agent, and I've done dozens of real estate transactions over the years at this point, professionally and commercially, or like personally as well as professionally, i.e. commercial property. The only thing I've ever seen an agent really help with to some extent is local market knowledge, especially if you do not know the market. But that's 1 out of 100 agents, and if you're looking in a different market, you're never going to be able to find that, or it's going to be very difficult to find anyway. So, if you're in Florida and you're doing research in Kansas, it's going to be very difficult to find that 1 in 100 agents that is, amazing, has true market knowledge and can really help you. And then the price generally you're going to have to pay is for something like that is just astronomical compared to the actual value that it brings. So anyway, off on a tangent there, but point being is that A lot of these aggregate services have propped up, and even sometimes you'll see you compete against them on an ad level. But so let's recap before we get into the weeds. What is local SEO? Well, local SEO, search engine optimization, is the techniques, tactics, things that we do to get your business to rank in the map pack here or in local results here. This stuff at this point, this top stuff is included with generally any company you go with AdWords, right? So if somebody comes along and says to me, I'm a custom closet company, I'm based in Southwest Florida, I will help anybody, like let's say they're Bonita based, but they will help anybody in Naples, Fort Myers, even Port Charlotte. They'll drive to do the job. It's 45, 50-minute drive, no big deal. Large multi-week job. I'm down for it. How do we grow the business? Number one thing I generally recommend is AdWords, right? Because we can get in front of that market immediately. We can scale up or scale down and say, okay, Google, if anybody searches for custom closets in this region, show our ad, and we're willing to spend, $500, $1,000, $10,000, whatever it is, every month. So that's separate. That is advertising, right? The other side of it is, organic, and it's based on how Google perceives you, right? The map pack is based on your Google My Business and optimizations to that and your website and various other things. And then the organic listings down here is based entirely on your website and how Google perceives your website. Now, to close the whole thing, again, why are we doing this? Well, because when somebody searches, the most important thing is this is a nice visual marker. It has some nice colors. It has reviews. It has, so literally like the star count of customers you've had in the past. And then it has reviews. When you click on it, something very similar happens on mobile, but it opens up your Google My Business profile as that business. It allows your potential customer to see some of your work. Videos, pictures, etc. It allows them to then read more about the business. Okay, what are all your services? What's your website? What's your address? And then all of your reviews, right? Including some updates as well, which is really cool and one of the nice things about Google My Business. And then if they're so inclined, they either visit your website or just give you a call. Right? Or you can, there used to be a contact. But so again, closing this all out, why is this important? Well, because 90% of all transactions, doesn't matter what kind of business you have, 90% go through Google, right? People, like whether or not they're looking for your actual product or service, what you have to offer, generally speaking. Like maybe I don't know PLC closets, right? But I know I need a custom closet. Or if they're looking to do some research on either the product or you personally, right? So maybe they have your business card. Maybe they met you. So they're looking to do some research on you. Over 90% of all transactions, including all local businesses, start or have in some part of the journey Google, right? So it's so important and so helpful to be here. If you're not here, you basically don't exist except to those people that you've met personally, right? There's no there's very little, unfortunately, these days, very little word of mouth. Technology has changed that in many ways as far as kind of the modern person's memory and ability to recall stuff. It used to be I got a guy or a go-to kind of, there was always that one or two guys in somebody's network that were very resourceful, and to some extent that still lives on, but nowadays we use Google as our collective memory as well as our evaluation tool. So if you are not on Google, if you're not showing up in this area or this area, you pretty much don't exist and people aren't finding you. And I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on this as just to kind of show you why this is important, and we're going to do give you some real numbers here. So this is a tool that I use for ad accounts as well as to do research on keywords. And so within Southwest Florida, as an example, so the Fort Myers and Naples DMA, which is basically Lee and Collier County, we're getting about 2,000 people a month searching for custom closets, right? So, obviously one business can't handle 2,000 custom closets. I mean, if we do 2,000 every single month, 24,000 custom closets, that's crazy. Not a year. No one business can do that, obviously. And if we look at, that one closet that we saw was a $50,000 job. Now, obviously, not every job is going to be 50,000, but as an example, we're looking at in this area, $1.2 billion worth of custom closet, work is done every year at that level. Let me do this. I'm going to divide it by the 50,000. Let's say your average job is $10,000. I think that would be pretty reasonable. You have large jobs like the 50. You have small jobs that are maybe $1,000, $2,000, $3,000. So you're looking at 2,000 people per month times 12 months times your average job. In this region, you're looking at about $250 million per year in custom closets, right? So, and this is only the people that we know are going to Google and searching. This isn't anybody else. The market could be even bigger to some extent, but the point is that most of the market is here. The vast majority of the market is here. In fact, I read a thing on LinkedIn, a funny post by an old colleague of mine that I used to work with about 10 years ago. And he's working with architects now. And he mentioned how essentially frustrated he was because a lot of architects think they don't need a website, web presence, marketing, etc., that they're just going to magically be found and that nobody uses Google. And, that is, I haven't encountered that in a bit, thankfully, especially these last couple of years since I started Olympia. But that was a huge thing for many years. What most people don't realize is that if you're not online, you don't exist at all anymore. At all, right? There is no more or virtually no natural growth. I would say with some exceptions, there's some exceptions to this. Some very, very big, like high dollar, super high margin, super unique. A lot of in the construction field, I've seen this. Some extremely high level companies that don't really exist online, only exist through word of mouth because what they do is so unique. There's only a handful of companies in the country that do it. But other than that, everything else, I mean, I would say 99% of the businesses out there, if you're not online, if you're not being, able to be found online, you don't exist and also will really struggle to survive. Like I said, over 90% of all purchasing decisions, even on a local basis, are run through Google at some point. They're either doing research on the product, on the category, on your company. And if you're not coming up, you're not going to be selected. It makes no sense. You'd have to. It just doesn't make any sense. Somebody's not going to know what they don't know, kind of thing. So what I wanted to show was an example of some additional things here. When we go into more businesses under the map, you can see the whole list of companies that do this. And right now, let's see how big this list is. Let's be 176. So in this region, Google has identified approximately 176 companies. And if we do that number again, it was what was it? I said 2,000 times, that's monthly searches, times 12. and we said the average job is what, $10,000. Yeah, right. And we divide that by 176 companies. Just curious how much this would be. So that would mean each company would be able to almost make $1.5 million with what's out there. That's not bad. Now, what happens is it's more of a log curve in terms of, there's probably very few companies doing the majority of the business, kind of the 80-20 rule type thing. Yeah, that's not bad at all. And in fact, you can do this kind of research if you're a small business or thinking about opening your small business. As you're doing that, as you're planning and preparing, you're like, okay, well, if I'm a courier, local courier, thinking about opening a local courier business, how many people are searching for courier type services? Special delivery, custom delivery, secure delivery, these kinds of things. Do the keyword research on that and see what that amount is. And then say, okay, what's the competition look like? If I can get, a majority of the business, let's say 50% or more, and because there's not much competition right off the bat, what am I looking at from a number or revenue perspective? And, doing the math in the background, business-wise, with all your expenses, what's my profit going to be? Those kinds of things. So let's dive deeper. I think that was a good summary. We're already at a half hour here. That's a good summary overall of local SEO, right? Now I wanted to get into how it works specifically, and I will break this part up into two sections. Section one here is the Google My Business and the Map Pack, right? So each one of these is a profile. Well, section one is going to be that. Section two will be the actual search results, right? Okay, so how does Google do what it does here? Now, a lot of this is guessing at this point. And it's a very educated guess, let me put it that way, because, I've had hundreds of clients I've worked with on this over the years, and they essentially come to me and say, or I tell them, it's very valuable to be here, to be, high on this list, and it would help your business. Or they notice a lot of times, honestly, it's as simple as they notice a competitor is higher and they want to be higher. They want to not be lower than their competitor. I mean, I would say that drives things more than a desire to actually get business, ironically. So the question is, well, how do you do that? How do you gain rankings? And so there's a number of different tools out there. There's a number of different researchers, companies, and people like myself who have been working with these tools for a long time that have kind of figured out, okay, if you do these things, this is what happens, right? Now, Google famously doesn't publish any of these things. It did have a leak about, I want to say 9 months ago, of some interesting stuff as far as organic SEO, kind of on a nationwide basis and what it looks at. But it's basically, it's secret sauce, because Google's trying to, and they've done a decent job of this over 20 plus years. They've tried to say, okay, we are the world's best resource for searching and answers. Come to us and we'll connect you with the best, whatever it is you want, information, company, products, etc. So you come to Google, you do a search, and we'll feed you back what makes sense. And so it's in their best interest, obviously, to not be completely clear on what that is, in part because of competition, and then in part because of, in some ways, companies and people like me, where if there was a nefarious, and we've seen this with Amazon. Amazon's a good example, where they've had a ton of scandal over reviews, and that's really hurt their model. Like at one point, reviews were so reliable and under valuable that you could just go to Amazon, sort by reviews, choose the product with the top reviews, and be happy with it. Now, since that was such an easy system to game, so many nefarious product companies have just paid third parties or done it themselves, inflated their reviews, and people are ending up with products that are horrible. So it makes a lot of sense to not be completely transparent, but there are certain things that, many of us have noticed and compiled over time. And what are those things? Well, number one, right off the bat, is just having a profile itself, right? That's the number one fastest thing you can do. It's the simplest thing you can do. You literally go to google.com/mybusiness and you set up an account, right? Mine looks a little different, but you would just literally hit set up or manage now, create an account underneath your Google account, and add your business information, right? So, and that, I could show you kind of what that looks like here. I'll do it for Olympia. And so this is what it looks like. It's a little weird the way they've done this interface. They've integrated it for some reason into AdWords. Or into, the Google results page. But if you click on edit your profile, you can then add your content. Add your business hours, contact location. I can add some additional photos of work we've done, stuff we're working on. I can add posts, et cetera, right? So that's number one, is actually have your profile created, have it fleshed out as much as possible. There is this little helpful profile strength bar at the top. I would recommend getting that as close to full as possible. Be very helpful. Yeah,